The coin purse felt unbearably light in Tobias Langford's calloused hand as he stood at the back of the dusty auction yard. His heart hammering against his ribs with such force he thought the stranger beside him might hear it. He had come to this God's forsaken border settlement with enough silver to buy seed for spring planting and perhaps a breeding goat, the last remnants of his dead father's modest estate. But now he watched those careful plans crumble to ash as the auctioneer dragged a shackled orc girl onto the platform. Her green skin marked with bruises, and her amber eyes wild with defiance despite the iron collar around her neck. Tobias had seen many things during his 24 years, most of them hard and unforgiving, but nothing had prepared him for the visceral revulsion that seized him as the crowd jeered, and the auctioneer began his grotesque sales pitch. The girl could not have been more than 19 or 20, her build powerful but lean from obvious malnutrition, her dark hair matted and tangled down her muscular back. Small tusks protruded from her lower jaw, and her pointed ears twitched at every cruel laugh from the assembled buyers. "Strong back, this one," the auctioneer shouted, yanking her chain so she stumbled forward. "Perfect for mine work or heavy labor. We start the bidding at 40 silver. Tobias felt his stomach turn. 40 silver. He had 38 to his name, everything he owned in the world. The crowd around him consisted mostly of mine overseers and plantation owners, men with cruel eyes and crueler reputations. He knew without asking what fate awaited her in their hands. Orcs were considered little better than beasts in these frontier territories, and female orcs purchased at auction rarely lived long under brutal working conditions. 45, called a man in expensive riding leathers, his face flushed with drink. The girl's amber eyes swept across the crowd, and for just a moment they locked with Tobias's. He saw no plea in them, no begging for mercy, only a fierce pride that refused to be extinguished even in this degradation. Something fundamental shifted in his chest, a feeling he could not name but could not ignore. 50, another voice shouted. Tobias's hand moved before his mind could catch up, raising his worn leather coin purse. 55, he heard himself say, his voice carrying across the yard with surprising steadiness. The auctioneer's eyes glinted with greed. 55 from the young man in back. Do I hear 60? 60, the drunk in riding leathers countered, turning to glare at Tobias with undisguised irritation. Tobias's mouth went dry. He had 38 silver. If he bid higher and won, he would need to produce coin he did not possess, which in this lawless settlement could easily mean a noose or worse. But the alternative was watching that proud, defiant girl disappear into a hell from which she would never emerge. The auctioneer opened his mouth to continue, but Tobias was already pushing through the crowd, his heart in his throat. He reached the platform and pulled the auctioneer aside, speaking in urgent, hushed tones. "I need to speak with whoever holds her papers. Now." The auctioneer's eyes narrowed with suspicion, but something in Tobias's expression must have convinced him this was serious business. He led Tobias to a scarred wooden table where a clerk sat with ledgers and documents. Tobias spread his entire coin purse on the table, counting out every piece of silver and copper he owned. 38 silver and 6 copper pennies. Everything. "This is all I have," Tobias said quietly, "but I can sign a labor contract. 6 months of my work, anywhere you choose, at standard wages. That would cover the difference and then some." The clerk exchanged glances with the auctioneer. Labor contracts were valuable in the frontier territories where workers were scarce. A young, healthy human male willing to sign away 6 months could be worth substantial silver to the right buyer. "You willing to put that in writing?" the clerk asked. "Yes." 20 minutes later, Tobias stood on shaking legs as the clerk counted out coins to the auctioneer and filed away the contract that bound Tobias to 6 months of labor at the Thornhill Logging Company, a notorious operation 30 miles north known for brutal conditions. The auctioneer handed him a key and a rolled parchment bearing an official seal. "She's yours, boy. Try not to let her kill you in your sleep." Tobias barely heard him. He walked on unsteady legs to where the orc girl stood shackled at the edge of the platform, her amber eyes following his approach with wary confusion. Up close, he could see the full extent of her injuries. A split lip, bruises along her powerful arms, scarring on her wrists from previous shackles. She was taller than him by perhaps 3 inches, her shoulders broad and capable despite her malnourishment. With trembling fingers, Tobias unlocked the iron collar around her neck. It fell away with a heavy clank that seemed to echo across the suddenly silent auction yard. He unlocked the shackles on her wrists next, then stepped back quickly, holding up both hands to show he meant no threat. "You are free," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "You owe me nothing." The orc girl stared at him as though he had spoken in a language she did not comprehend. Her hands moved slowly to her throat, touching the raw skin where the collar had been. Around them, the crowd muttered with confusion and anger. The drunk in riding leathers was shouting something about fraud and demanding his money back. "I do not understand," the girl said finally, her voice rough and accented but clear. "You paid silver for me." "I did," Tobias agreed. "And now I am telling you that you are free. The papers say you belong to me, but I am giving you your freedom. You can go wherever you wish." He held out the ownership papers and watched her eyes widen as he tore them slowly in half, then in half again, letting the pieces flutter to the dusty ground. For a long moment, she simply stared at the torn parchment, her expression cycling through disbelief, suspicion, and something that might have been the beginning of hope. Then she looked at him again, and her amber eyes had grown bright with unshed tears. "Why?" she asked. Tobias struggled to find words for something he barely understood himself. "Because it was wrong," he said finally. "All of this is wrong, and I could not walk away." The auctioneer was shouting now, angry about the destroyed papers, but Tobias ignored him. He reached into his empty pocket and pulled out the last thing of value he possessed, a small silver compass that had belonged to his father. He pressed it into the orc girl's rough palm. "Take this. You can sell it in the next town for enough silver to buy food and supplies. Head east to the borderlands. I hear the settlements there are more tolerant." She looked down at the compass, then back at his face, her expression unreadable. "You have given everything," she said slowly. "Your silver, your freedom, if those papers they made you sign are what I think they are." "Why would you do this for an orc?" "Because you are not a thing to be bought and sold," Tobias said simply. "You are a person, and you deserved better than what was about to happen to you." The girl closed her fingers around the compass, and a single tear tracked down her green cheek. She opened her mouth as if to speak, then closed it again. Finally, she stepped forward and did something that surprised them both. She placed one large hand on his shoulder, a gesture that seemed to carry enormous weight. "I am Fenna Farrowvale," she said. "And I am in your debt, Tobias Langford, whether you wish it or not. How did you know my name?" "I heard you give it when you signed the contract." She paused, then added with the ghost of a sad smile, "I have learned to listen carefully to the words of humans. My life has often depended on it." Before Tobias could respond, rough hands grabbed his arms from behind. The auctioneer had summoned the settlement's hired guards, and they were none too pleased about the disruption to their profitable enterprise. Tobias was dragged backwards, struggling against their grip. "Wait," he shouted. "The sale was legal. I paid the price. What I do with my property afterward is my business. Causing a disturbance is everyone's business, one guard growled. You are coming with us until you cool down. Tobias twisted in their grip, trying to catch one last glimpse of Fenna. Go, he shouted to her. Run. Get out of here while you can. But Fenna did not run. Instead, she moved with startling speed, her powerful legs carrying her forward as she drove her shoulder into the nearest guard with enough force to send him sprawling. The second guard released Tobias to draw his sword, but Fenna was faster, kicking the blade from his hand with a precise strike that spoke of combat training. Within seconds, both guards were on the ground, groaning. Fenna grabbed Tobias's wrist with an iron grip. Come, she commanded. We run together or not at all. They ran. The settlement blurred past them as Fenna pulled Tobias through narrow alleys and between buildings, her longer stride forcing him to sprint at his maximum speed just to keep up. Behind them, shouts of pursuit echoed off the wooden structures, but Fenna seemed to know exactly where she was going. She led him to the edge of the settlement where the buildings gave way to scrubland and scattered trees, then veered sharply north toward a line of rocky hills. Tobias's lungs burned and his legs screamed in protest, but he kept running. They climbed into the hills as the sun began to sink toward the western horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and crimson. Finally, when Tobias's vision was beginning to darken at the edges, Fenna pulled him into a narrow cave entrance hidden behind a tumble of boulders. Inside, the cave opened into a small chamber barely tall enough for Fenna to stand upright. She released his wrist and moved to the entrance, peering out at the landscape below. Tobias collapsed against the stone wall, gasping for breath, his heart hammering so hard he thought it might burst from his chest. They will search for us, Fenna said quietly, still watching the settlement in the distance. But they will not search long. One freed slave is not worth much effort, and you are not valuable enough to warrant a real pursuit. By morning, they will have forgotten us. You came back for me, Tobias managed between gasps. Why? Fenna turned from the entrance, and in the dimness of the cave her amber eyes seemed to glow faintly. You spent everything to free me. You asked nothing in return. Such a debt cannot be unpaid. I told you, Tobias said, finally catching his breath enough to speak normally. You owe me nothing. That is not how debts of honor work among my people, Fenna replied. She moved further into the cave and settled herself against the opposite wall, her powerful frame somehow making the stone look comfortable. You saved my life and gave me my freedom. Until I have repaid this debt, I am bound to you by honor. Tobias felt a strange mixture of emotions swirl through him: exhaustion, fear for what lay ahead, and something warmer that he could not quite name. I do not want you to feel bound to me, he said quietly. That defeats the entire purpose of what I tried to do. Too bad, Fenna said, and there was a hint of humor in her rough voice. You do not get to choose how I respond to your kindness, Tobias Langford. You made your choice. Now I make mine. They sat in silence as the last light faded from the cave entrance. In the darkness, Tobias could hear Fenna's steady breathing, could smell the scent of the frontier on her, dust and leather and something wilder he could not identify. His mind raced with questions and worries. He had no money, no supplies, and a labor contract that would claim him in 2 days' time, when he was expected to report to Thornhill Logging Company. He had just made himself an outlaw by helping a purchased slave escape, which meant he could never return to any settlement where those papers might be filed. What will you do? Fenna asked, as if reading his thoughts. I do not know, Tobias admitted. I suppose I have to report to the logging company. That contract is legally binding. 6 months of hard labor in a place that kills men regularly, Fenna said flatly. "This is what you traded for my freedom." It seemed like the right choice at the time. It was foolish. "Maybe," Tobias agreed, "but I would make the same choice again." More silence. Then Fenna spoke again, her voice softer. "Where did you learn to see orcs as people? Most humans in these territories would sooner kill us than acknowledge our humanity." Tobias considered the question carefully. "My father was a traveling doctor," he said finally. "When I was young, before he settled down to farm, he would take me with him on his rounds. We went everywhere, treated everyone who needed help. I remember once we were called to an orc settlement where a fever had broken out. My father spent 2 weeks there, treating the sick, teaching them how to prevent the disease from spreading. The orcs there were not monsters. They were parents worried for their children, elders concerned for their community. They laughed and cried and hoped just like any human I had ever known. I never forgot that. Your father sounds like a rare man." "He was," Tobias said, feeling the familiar ache of loss. "He died 6 months ago. Fever took him, ironically enough. I have been trying to make something of his farm ever since, but I am a better healer than I am a farmer." "You inherited his compassion," Fenna observed. "That is worth more than skill with crops." Tobias smiled in the darkness. "Compassion does not fill an empty stomach, unfortunately." "No," Fenna agreed, "but honor can be repaid in many ways. You need to survive 6 months at Thornhill logging." "I am very good at helping people survive." "What do you mean?" Fenna shifted, and Tobias heard the rustle of her movement. "I was not always a slave," she said quietly. "I was a warrior in my clan, trained from childhood. I know how to hunt, how to track, how to fight, and how to heal wounds. I know which plants can be eaten and which will kill you. I know how to read the land and predict weather. These skills kept my people alive in harsh territories. They can keep you alive too." "You want to stay with me?" Tobias asked, surprise evident in his voice. "I want to repay my debt," Fenna corrected. "And you need someone to watch your back. The logging camps are dangerous places, especially for someone who has made enemies. Besides, where else would I go? East to the borderlands alone. I have no weapons, no supplies, and every settlement between here and there has bounty hunters who profit from returning escaped slaves. My best chance of survival is to stay hidden in this region until the interest in finding me fades. I might as well spend that time keeping you alive." Tobias felt warmth spread through his chest, though he could not have said whether it was gratitude, relief, or something more complex. "Then I am grateful for your help," he said sincerely. "And I am sorry that my attempt to free you has trapped you here instead." "Do not apologize," Fenna said firmly. "For the first time in 2 years, I sleep without a collar around my neck. That alone is worth everything." They settled into an uneasy silence as exhaustion finally overtook them both. Tobias dozed fitfully, waking several times during the night to the sound of Fenna moving to check the cave entrance or adjust her position. Each time, knowing she was there keeping watch allowed him to slip back into sleep. When dawn light finally crept into the cave, Tobias woke to find Fenna already gone. Panic seized him for a moment until he heard movement outside, and she ducked back through the entrance carrying an armful of supplies. She had somehow acquired a waterskin, a small knife, and several pieces of dried meat wrapped in cloth. "Where did you get these?" Tobias asked, sitting up stiffly. "There was a traveler's cache hidden in the rocks," Fenna explained. "Probably left by smugglers or outlaws who use this route. We need it more than they do." She tossed him the waterskin and a piece of meat. "Eat, we have a long walk ahead of us." "Walk where?" "To Thornhill Logging Company," Fenna said matter-of-factly. "You have to report in 2 days. We should arrive 1 day early so we can scout the area and learn what we are dealing with." Over the next day and a half, Tobias gained a new appreciation for Fenna's skills. She led them through the wilderness with confident ease, always seeming to know which paths would offer the best cover and which water sources were safe to drink from. She could read tracks in the dirt, identifying what animals had passed and how long ago. When they needed food, she fashioned a snare from plant fibers and caught 2 rabbits with such efficiency that Tobias felt embarrassed by his own clumsy attempts to help. They talked as they walked, sharing stories of their different lives. Fenna told him about her clan in the Northern Territories, a proud community that had maintained its traditions for generations, until human expansion had pushed them from their ancestral lands. She had been captured during a raid 2 years ago, sold and resold multiple times, each owner more brutal than the last. Tobias shared stories of his childhood traveling with his father, learning the healing arts, and his clumsy attempts to maintain the farm after his father's death. He found himself laughing for the first time in months as Fenna mimicked his description of his attempts to milk a goat. "You are telling me," she said with disbelief, "that you squeezed its ear." "I told you, I had never milked anything before," Tobias protested. "My father always hired help for that. The goat was not happy about it either." Fenna's laugh was a deep, rich sound that seemed to roll up from her chest. It transformed her face, softening the hard edges that slavery had carved into her features. Tobias found himself staring, then quickly looked away when she caught him. They reached the logging camp the evening before Tobias was due to report. From their vantage point on a hillside overlooking the operation, they could see the full scope of what awaited him. Rough timber buildings surrounded a cleared area where enormous trees lay in various stages of processing. Men moved like ants between the structures, hauling logs with heavy chains, working massive saws, loading wagons. Even from a distance, Tobias could hear the constant noise. Axes biting into wood, men shouting, the groan of stressed timber. "It is worse than I thought," Fenna said quietly, her eyes scanning the camp with tactical precision. "They are working those men harder than mules. You see how many are limping, and there, by the medical tent, 3 men with splinted limbs." Tobias saw what she meant. The camp was clearly a brutal place where injury was common and rest was rare. His stomach knotted with dread. "I will not be able to stay near the camp," Fenna continued. "If they see an orc wandering free, they will either try to kill me or capture me. But these hills are full of caves and hiding places. I can set up a base nearby, and you can slip away when you have the chance. I will teach you some basic survival skills, things that might help you in the camp." Over the next few hours, as darkness fell, Fenna gave Tobias a crash course in practical knowledge. She showed him how to bind a wound to prevent infection, how to identify edible plants that grew in the area, how to move quietly and avoid attention. Most importantly, she taught him how to recognize the signs of serious injury that needed immediate treatment. If you see bone, or if a wound will not stop bleeding, you find a way to get help immediately, she said seriously. "Do not be a hero. Dead men repay no debts." When the moon rose high above them, Fenna finally sat back and looked at him with an expression he could not quite read. "You should rest," she said. "Tomorrow will be hard." "Fenna," Tobias said hesitantly, "thank you for all of this. You did not have to do any of it." "Yes, I did," she replied simply. "Now sleep. I will keep watch." Tobias wanted to protest, but exhaustion claimed him almost the moment he lay down on the bedroll Fenna had fashioned from pine boughs and moss. His last conscious thought was of amber eyes glowing in the moonlight. He woke at dawn to find a small bundle beside him, more dried meat, a waterskin, and a small carved token that looked like it might be orcish work. When he picked it up, Fenna appeared from behind a boulder where she had been watching the camp below. "It is a ward token," she explained. "My mother made one for each of her children. It is meant to bring protection and luck. I want you to have it." Tobias closed his fingers around the smooth wood, feeling the careful craftsmanship in every curve. "I cannot take this. It is yours from your family." "Then keep it safe for me until I see you again," Fenna said. "Think of it as collateral. You must survive so you can return it to me." Tobias tucked the token inside his shirt, where it rested against his heart. "I will see you again," he promised. "Every 3 days," Fenna said. "When you can manage it, slip away after dark and come to this hillside. I will be watching for you. If you cannot come, I will understand, but do not make me wait longer than a week or I will assume the worst and come looking for you. That would be dangerous." "So is everything else we have done," Fenna pointed out. "Now go, report to the camp overseer, and Tobias." She caught his arm as he turned to leave, her grip strong but somehow gentle. "Stay alive. That is an order." Tobias felt a strange tightness in his chest as he looked up at her. In just 2 days, this orc woman had become something he had not expected. A friend. Possibly more than a friend, though he was afraid to examine that feeling too closely. "I will do my best," he said. He made his way down the hillside as the camp began to stir with activity. At the main gate, he presented his contract papers to a board guard who barely glanced at them before pointing him toward a large timber building. Inside, he found the camp overseer, a thick-necked man named Garrett who looked him up and down with obvious skepticism. "You are the new contract worker. You look half-starved. Can you even lift an axe?" "I can work," Tobias said simply. "We will see about that. You are assigned to Crew 7. They are a man short after Jensen lost his arm last week. You will work dawn to dusk, 6 days a week. You get 7th-day mornings off for rest and mending. Food is provided twice a day. Break your contract or cause trouble and we will add penalty time. Any questions?" Tobias shook his head. "Good. Report to the bunkhouse. Someone will wake you when it is time to start." The next weeks blurred together into an exhausting cycle of backbreaking labor. Tobias's crew was responsible for delimbing fallen trees, stripping away branches with heavy axes before the logs could be processed. The work destroyed his hands, leaving them blistered and bleeding despite the rags he wrapped around them. His shoulders and back screamed in constant agony. Several times he witnessed serious injuries. A man crushed by a rolling log, another struck by a falling branch, a third who simply collapsed from exhaustion and never got up again. But Tobias survived, partly through stubbornness and partly through the knowledge Fenna had given him. He knew which plants to mash into a paste for his blistered hands. He knew how to pace himself to avoid total collapse. He knew when to seek shade and water before heat exhaustion could claim him. 3 days after his arrival, he managed to slip away after dark and climb the hillside to their meeting spot. Fenna materialized from the shadows like a spirit, and the relief in her face when she saw him made his heart skip. "You look terrible," she said bluntly, moving close to examine him in the moonlight. Her fingers probed his shoulders and back with surprising gentleness, checking for injury. "They are working you to death." "Not yet," Tobias said, trying for humor despite his exhaustion. "I am still standing." "Barely." Fenna made him sit and produced a small clay pot from her pack. Inside was a strong-smelling salve. She began working it into his shoulders with firm, skilled hands, and Tobias could not suppress a groan as the medicine began to ease his screaming muscles. "This will help with the pain and inflammation," Fenna explained. "I made it from herbs I found in the forest. Use it every night if you can." They sat together in the darkness, and Tobias told her about the camp, about the brutal conditions and casual cruelty of the overseers. Fenna listened intently, occasionally asking questions that revealed her tactical mind was working through everything he said. "You cannot survive 6 months like this," she said finally. "No one can. They are burning through workers deliberately, collecting their contract labor and working them until they are crippled or dead." "Then what do I do?" Tobias asked. "Survive each day," Fenna said, "and trust me to find a solution." Over the following weeks, Tobias and Fenna developed a rhythm. He would slip away every 3 or 4 days to meet her on the hillside, and she would tend to his injuries, feed him food more nutritious than the thin gruel the camp provided, and share information she had gathered. Fenna had been scouting extensively, learning the patterns of the guards, the camp layout, even the financial structure of the operation. "They are not as stable as they appear," she told him during one meeting. "Thornhill Logging owes significant debt to investors in the southern cities. They are pushing the workers so hard because they are desperate to fill contracts before their creditors lose patience." Tobias barely heard her. He was too busy trying not to focus on how close she was sitting, how her hands felt as she wrapped fresh bandages around his abraded palms, how the moonlight made her green skin seem to glow. Somewhere during these meetings, something had shifted between them. The conversations had become more personal, the silences more comfortable. He found himself thinking about her constantly during the long work days, counting the hours until he could see her again. "You are not listening," Fenna said, breaking through his thoughts. "Sorry," Tobias said quickly. "I was just thinking about how I do not know what I would do without these meetings, without you." Fenna's hands stilled on his bandages. In the moonlight, her amber eyes were luminous and unreadable. "Tobias," she said quietly, "you know what we are doing is dangerous for many reasons. If they catch you sneaking away, they will add time to your contract. If they find me, they will kill me or worse. But there is another danger too." "What do you mean?" "I mean that orcs and humans do not fall in love," Fenna said bluntly. "It is forbidden by both our peoples. Such relationships bring only pain." Tobias felt his heart stutter. "Is that what is happening?" he asked, hardly daring to breathe. "Are we falling in love?" Fenna looked away, her jaw tight. "I do not know, but I know that I think about you every moment you are gone. I know that I would burn down that entire camp if they seriously hurt you. I know that when you appear on this hillside, my heart does something I cannot control. And I know that this is dangerous." Tobias reached out slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, and gently turned her face back toward his. "My father used to say that love is not about easy choices. It is about choosing someone anyway, despite the obstacles. I did not buy your freedom expecting anything in return, Fenna. But if you are asking whether my feelings for you have grown into something beyond friendship, then yes, they have. You are the bravest, strongest, most honorable person I have ever met, and I am falling in love with you, dangers be damned." For a long moment, Fenna simply stared at him. Then, with a sound that was half laugh and half sob, she leaned forward and pressed her forehead against his, a gesture he had learned was deeply intimate among her people. "You are a fool, Tobias Langford," she whispered. "Probably," he agreed. "A beautiful, compassionate fool who is going to get us both killed. Maybe, but I would rather die having loved you than live never having tried." Fenna pulled back just far enough to look into his eyes. Then, very carefully, she kissed him. Her tusks made the angle slightly awkward, but Tobias did not care. He wrapped his arms around her powerful shoulders and kissed her back with all the emotion he had been holding inside for weeks. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. Fenna rested her forehead against his again, her eyes closed. "We cannot have a future," she said quietly. "You know this. When your contract ends, you will return to human society. I will go to the borderlands where orcs can live freely. Our paths must diverge." "No," Tobias said firmly. "I do not accept that. We will find a way." "How? Where could we possibly go where both humans and orcs would accept us?" "I do not know yet," Tobias admitted, "but I know that I did not give up everything to free you just so we could both end up alone. There has to be a way." Fenna laughed softly, though her eyes were wet. "You really are a fool." "Then be a fool with me," Tobias said. They stayed together on that hillside until nearly dawn, holding each other, talking quietly about impossible futures and stubborn hope. When Tobias finally had to return to camp, Fenna caught his hand one last time. "Stay safe," she said. "Please, I cannot lose you." "You will not," Tobias promised. "I am too stubborn to die." But the universe, it seemed, had other plans. 2 weeks later, disaster struck the logging camp in the form of a massive tree that fell wrong, crushing 3 men and causing a chain reaction that injured half a dozen more. The camp's single doctor was overwhelmed, frantically trying to save lives with insufficient supplies and too many critical patients. Tobias found himself pulled from his crew to help. His father's medical training, which he had barely thought about in weeks, suddenly became the most important thing in the world. He moved between injured men, doing what he could to stabilize wounds, ease pain, and prevent infection. He worked through the night and into the next day, barely aware of his own exhaustion. When the crisis finally passed, he had saved 2 men who would certainly have died without intervention. The camp doctor, an older man named Pierce, looked at him with new respect. "You have real training," Pierce said. "It was not a question." "Who taught you?" "My father," Tobias admitted. "He was a traveling doctor." Pierce nodded slowly. "I need an assistant. This place is too dangerous for one doctor to handle alone. If you are willing, I will petition to have your contract reassigned to medical duties." Tobias felt hope flare in his chest for the first time in weeks. Medical assistants worked long hours, but the labor was not physically destructive like logging. He might actually survive his full contract term. "I would be grateful," he said. The reassignment happened within days, and suddenly Tobias's life at the camp transformed. He still worked dawn to dusk, but now he was learning, practicing the healing arts his father had taught him, making a genuine difference in the lives of the injured workers. He had his own small room near the medical tent, better food, and more respect from the other workers. He was also able to slip away more frequently to meet Fenna. When he told her the news, she actually smiled, a rare and brilliant expression that transformed her entire face. "You might actually survive this," she said, relief evident in every word. "I was so worried." "I told you I am too stubborn to die," Tobias said, pulling her close. "But Fenna, I have been thinking. When my contract ends, I am not going back to my father's farm. There is nothing for me there. What if we went east together, to the borderlands? You said settlements there are more tolerant of orcs." "They are also full of outlaws and exiles," Fenna pointed out. "It is not a safe place." "Is anywhere safe?" Tobias countered. "At least there we could be together without hiding." Fenna was quiet for a long moment. Then she said softly, "You would really give up your human life for me? Leave behind everything you know?" "Everything I know is already gone," Tobias said. "My father is dead. My farm failed. I have no family, no ties to any place. The only thing in this world that matters to me is standing right here. So yes, Fenna Farrowvale, I would go with you to the borderlands or the frozen wastes or the burning deserts if that is what it took to be with you." Fenna kissed him then, fierce and desperate, her powerful arms pulling him tight against her. "I love you," she whispered against his mouth. "I did not want to, I tried not to, but I love you, Tobias Langford." "I love you too," he said. "And I will keep loving you no matter what the world thinks about it." The next 4 months passed in a strange mix of hardship and hope. Tobias worked tirelessly in the medical tent, honing his skills and building a reputation as a gifted healer. Fenna continued living in the wilderness, hunting and gathering, stockpiling supplies for their eventual journey east. They met as often as possible, stealing precious hours together, planning their future, learning everything about each other. Tobias learned about Orcish culture, about their complex honor codes and their deep respect for strength, balanced with compassion. Fenna learned about human customs, about the small tenderness that defined Tobias's worldview. They taught each other their languages, shared stories of their ancestors, dreamed aloud about a life where they would not have to hide their love. But as Tobias's contract neared its end, a problem emerged. Garrett, the camp overseer, approached him one evening with an offer. "You have proven valuable," Garrett said bluntly. "Dr. Pierce wants to keep you on permanently. We are prepared to offer you a paid position. Good wages, your own cabin, respected status in the camp. You would be a fool to turn it down." Tobias felt his stomach sink. It was a generous offer, the kind of opportunity that could set up a man for life. But it would mean staying here, continuing to hide his relationship with Fenna, living a half-life forever. "Can I think about it?" Tobias asked. "You have 1 week," Garrett said. "After that, the offer expires." That night, Tobias climbed the hillside to find Fenna already waiting. When he told her about the offer, her face went carefully neutral. "You should take it," she said quietly. "What? No, we have plans. Plans made by fools in love," Fenna said. "Tobias, this is a real opportunity. You could have a career, stability, respect, everything you deserve. The borderlands offer nothing but hardship and danger." "They offer you," Tobias said firmly. "That is enough." "It should not be enough," Fenna argued. "You have already sacrificed so much for me. Your savings, 6 months of brutal labor, your future plans. I will not let you sacrifice your career too." "You do not get to make that decision for me," Tobias said, frustration creeping into his voice. "I choose you, Fenna. I will always choose you." "Then you are choosing wrong." The argument escalated, both of them saying things they did not mean, words sharpened by fear and love and impossible choices. It ended with Fenna turning and walking away into the darkness, and Tobias standing alone on the hillside with his heart breaking. He did not see her for 5 days. Each evening he climbed to their meeting place and found only emptiness. On the 6th day, he could not bear it any longer. He went to Dr. Pierce and asked for a full day of leave, claiming he needed to hike into the nearest settlement for personal business. Pierce, who had come to trust him completely, agreed without question. Tobias left at dawn and spent hours searching the hills and forests where he knew Fenna had been camping. He finally found her hideout in a deep ravine, a well-concealed cave system she had transformed into a surprisingly comfortable shelter. But she was not there. Tobias spent the entire day searching, calling her name until his voice was hoarse. As evening approached and he prepared to give up, he heard a sound behind him. He spun to find Fenna standing at the edge of the clearing, her expression guarded. "You should not be here," she said. "Neither should you," Tobias countered. "You should be with me where you belong." "I do not belong anywhere," Fenna said bitterly. "That is what you do not understand. I am an exile, an escaped slave, a monster in the eyes of most of your people. You can have a real life, Tobias. I will not be the thing that destroys it." Tobias closed the distance between them in 3 strides and took her hands in his, gripping them tightly. "Listen to me," he said intensely. "I did not spend my last savings to free you just so you could martyr yourself for my supposed benefit. I did not fall in love with you just to walk away when things got complicated. You are not destroying my life, Fenna. You are the only thing that makes it worth living. You say that now, Fenna said, but her voice was shaking. But what about in 5 years? 10. When you are old and looking back at everything you could have been if you had not tied yourself to an orc? I will be looking at the woman I love, Tobias said simply. And I will be grateful every single day that I was brave enough to choose happiness over safety. Fenna, I know you are afraid. I am afraid too, but being afraid is not a good reason to give up on something this important. Fenna's amber eyes were wet with tears. You really will not reconsider. You will not stay at the camp. Not without you, Tobias said. And since you cannot stay here, we go east together. That is my final answer. Fenna made a sound halfway between a laugh and a sob, then pulled him into a crushing embrace. You are the most stubborn, irritating, wonderful man I have ever met, she said against his shoulder. And I love you so much it terrifies me. Good, Tobias said, holding her just as tightly. Then let us be terrified together. They spent that night in her cave, making plans and talking until the stars wheeled overhead. They would leave immediately after Tobias's contract ended. Fenna had already mapped several routes east that would keep them away from major settlements and bounty hunters. They would travel light and fast, living off the land until they reached the borderlands. Once there, they would find a frontier community that needed a healer and was tolerant enough to accept an orc woman as his partner. It would not be easy, but it would be theirs. When dawn came, Tobias had to return to camp. Fenna walked with him to the edge of the forest, unwilling to let him go until the last possible moment. 1 more week, she said, holding both his hands. Then we start our real life. 1 more week, Tobias agreed. I can survive anything for 1 more week. But fate, it seemed, had 1 more test in store for them. 3 days before his contract was set to expire, a group of bounty hunters rode into the logging camp. They were looking for an escaped orc slave, last seen in the region over 5 months ago. They had papers authorizing them to search the area and offering a substantial reward for information leading to her capture. Tobias felt his blood run cold as he listened to them describe Fenna to the camp overseer. He kept his face carefully neutral, but inside his mind was racing. If the bounty hunters started doing a thorough search of the area, they would eventually find Fenna's hideout. She needed to be warned immediately. That night, despite the risk, Tobias slipped away from camp hours earlier than planned. He ran through the darkness, heedless of the noise he made, driven by pure terror. He found Fenna at their usual meeting place, and the moment she saw his face, she knew something was wrong. Bounty hunters, Tobias gasped. At the camp, looking for you, papers with your description. We have to run now. Fenna's expression went hard and focused, the warrior she had once been emerging clearly. How many? 6. Well armed. They are planning to start a systematic search tomorrow. Then we leave tonight, Fenna said decisively. You go back to camp, pack whatever you can carry quickly, and meet me at the northern trailhead in 2 hours. Do not take anything that will be missed. We are about to disappear. My contract is not up for 3 more days, Tobias protested. If I break it now, they will come after me too. They will come after you anyway when they realize you helped me, Fenna pointed out grimly. The moment those bounty hunters start questioning people, someone will remember seeing you slip away at night. Better to run now while we still have surprise on our side. Tobias knew she was right, but leaving 3 days early meant breaking a legal contract, making himself an outlaw. Then again, he had already chosen his path the moment he tore up Fenna's ownership papers. There was no going back now. 2 hours, he agreed. Northern trailhead. Do not leave without me. Never, Fenna promised. Tobias ran back to camp, his mind calculating rapidly. He could not take much without arousing suspicion, but he needed medical supplies, food, and any small valuables he could trade. He packed a single bag with essentials, including every healing herb and bandage he could reasonably carry. He left a note for Dr. Pierce, thanking him for the opportunity and apologizing for the abrupt departure. Then, moving like a shadow, he slipped out of camp for the last time. Fenna was waiting at the northern trailhead with 2 packs and a grim expression. "We need to move fast," she said. "By dawn, they will know you are gone and they will put together that we left together. That makes us both targets." They traveled through the night, Fenna setting a brutal pace that had Tobias gasping for breath within the first hour. But he kept up, driven by adrenaline and fear and determination. By dawn, they were miles away, deep in wilderness that showed no sign of human habitation. They did not stop moving for 3 days. Fenna led them through terrain that was deliberately difficult to track. Rocky slopes, streams they waded through for hours, dense forest that left no clear trail. They ate while walking, slept in shifts for only a few hours at a time, spoke rarely to conserve energy. On the 4th day, Fenna finally allowed them to stop for more than a brief rest. They had reached a high mountain pass that offered a clear view back the way they had come. No pursuit was visible. Either the bounty hunters had given up, or they were looking in the wrong direction. "We should be safe to slow down now," Fenna said, collapsing against a boulder with obvious relief. "We are nearly at the borderland territories. Another few days and we will be beyond the reach of most law enforcement." Tobias sat beside her, every muscle in his body screaming. "We made it," he said, hardly believing it. "We actually made it." "Do not celebrate yet," Fenna cautioned. "We still have to find a place that will accept us." But her words could not dampen Tobias's relief. They had escaped. They were together. Everything else they could figure out. Over the next week, they made their way east into the borderlands. The landscape gradually changed from thick forest to rolling grassland dotted with hardy shrubs. The air grew drier, the sky wider. They saw evidence of both human and orc settlements, though they carefully avoided direct contact until they knew more about the region. Finally, they came across a small frontier community built around a natural spring. It was a rough place, clearly composed of people who had fled their pasts. Human outlaws, orc exiles, a few members of other species Tobias did not recognize. But everyone seemed to coexist peacefully, united by their status as outsiders. Tobias and Fenna entered the settlement cautiously, hands visible to show they meant no threat. A gray-haired human woman who seemed to be some sort of community leader approached them with a calculating look. "You are running from something," she observed bluntly. "Everyone here is running from something," Fenna countered. "We are looking for a place to settle, somewhere we can live in peace. I am a skilled hunter and warrior. He is a trained healer. We can contribute." The woman looked between them, her eyes taking in their clasped hands, the obvious devotion in how they stood close together. A small smile touched her weathered face. "Healer, you say? We lost ours 2 months ago. Fever took him. We have been struggling without medical care." She paused, then added, "We do not care about your pasts here. We do not care about species or where you came from. We care that you work hard, treat others fairly, and defend the community when needed. Can you do that?" "Yes," Tobias said firmly. "Absolutely yes." The woman nodded. "Then welcome to Last Hope. It is not much, but it is ours. You can build a home here if you are willing to make it work." Tears pricked at Tobias's eyes. He looked at Fenna and saw his own emotions reflected in her face: relief, joy, and cautious hope. They had found it. A place where they could build a life together. The next months were hard work, but filled with purpose. The community gave them a plot of land near the spring where Tobias built a small clinic with Fenna's help. Her strength made construction quick, and his design skills made the structure functional. He began treating the settlement's residents, earning their trust and gratitude. Fenna contributed by hunting, helping with community defense, and teaching combat skills to those who wanted to learn. They built a small cabin next to the clinic, a space that was entirely theirs. It was modest but comfortable, and every board Tobias nailed and every stone Fenna placed felt like an act of defiance against a world that said they should not exist together. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the grasslands gold and crimson, Fenna took Tobias's hand in hers. "I have been thinking," she said quietly, "about everything that happened, about that day at the auction. What about it?" "You told me I owed you nothing," Fenna said. "And you were right. I do not owe you a debt, but what I feel for you is not obligation or gratitude, it is choice. Every day I choose you. I choose this life we are building. I choose to love you not because I must, but because I want to." Tobias turned to face her fully, his heart so full he thought it might burst. "I choose you too," he said. "Every day, every moment. I will keep choosing you for the rest of my life if you will let me." Fenna smiled, that rare, brilliant expression that still made his breath catch. "Then let us make it official. Among my people, a bonding ceremony requires only two things, a public declaration and a shared promise before witnesses. Will you bond with me, Tobias Langford? Will you be my partner in this life and whatever comes after?" "Yes," Tobias said without hesitation. 1,000 times yes. They held the ceremony a week later at sunset, with the entire community of Last Hope gathered as witnesses. It was a simple affair by most standards. Fenna and Tobias stood together before the spring, each speaking their vows in both human and orcish, promising to love, honor, and protect each other for all their days. The gray-haired woman who had welcomed them blessed their union, and the community celebrated with food and music that echoed across the grasslands. As the stars emerged overhead and the celebration continued around them, Tobias pulled Fenna close and kissed her, tasting salt from happy tears he could not identify as hers or his own. "I love you," he whispered against her lips. "My wife, my partner, my everything." "I love you too," Fenna replied, her voice thick with emotion. "My husband, my liberator, my choice." They danced together under the stars, surrounded by a community that accepted them in a life they had built from nothing but stubborn hope and impossible love. Tobias thought back to that day at the auction, to the moment he had decided to spend everything he had to free one defiant orc girl. He had thought he was giving her freedom, but in truth, she had freed him too, from loneliness, from purposelessness, from a life half-lived. He had spent his last savings to tell her she owed him nothing, but what they had given each other was worth far more than any coin could measure. They had given each other a future, a home, and a love that defied every boundary the world tried to place on them. And as they held each other under the vast borderland sky, both knew with absolute certainty that they would choose each other again and again in this life and every life to come. That was not a debt. That was not obligation. That was simply love, pure and true and freely given. It was everything.